I wanted to say hi to Kim's parents in Progreso. I'm in San Miguel de Allende in Guanajuato. So yeah, just thought I'd take advantage of that. Okay, so yeah, let's get things started because there are a whole bunch of things we want to go through first before we get into our big discussion for what, which is why we're all here today. I wanted to first introduce you to Sophie. Sophie, do you want to explain about the interpretation and the language options for people?
Yes, I'll be happy to do that. Hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. So I'll just give a few informations in English, and then I'll do so in French as well, just to let you know that the meeting today is being interpreted. Both Nick and myself will be doing simultaneous interpretation. I think most of the presentations are going to be in English, so we'll be interpreting into French. But of course, questions are welcome in any language, and we'll be happy to interpret. It's the first time that we're relaying one another, so thank you for your understanding. En français, donc, bonjour. Nick et moi allons offrir l'interprétation simultanée aujourd'hui. La majorité de la rencontre va être en anglais, mais on offre l'interprétation simultanée au français. Shay va activer la fonction d'interprétation sous peu. Alors, vous allez voir une petite fenêtre qui va s'ouvrir, soit une icône de globe terrestre ou les mots interprétation. Sinon, vous pouvez l'activer dans vos paramètres de rencontre. Puis, ça va vous permettre d'accéder à la version française ou anglaise. Dans le fond, cliquez sur la langue que vous voulez entendre. Et si jamais vous voulez poser des questions en français, vous pouvez le faire, ça va nous faire plaisir de traduire pour le groupe. C'est la première fois qu'on se relaie en interprétation, alors merci pour votre patience, on va espérer que ça se passe bien. And just in case there are any questions in French, we'll be interpreting them into English, in which case you'll need to access the simultaneous interpretation function. So Shay is going to activate that in a few seconds. And once that's up, you'll see a little box or a little icon appearing at the bottom of your screen, or you can turn on interpretation in your meeting settings. And that'll allow you to turn the interpretation on or off, and basically to click on the language that you want to hear. So if there's a French question, we'll interpret it into English. So you'll have to go into the English channel. There might be a little bit of a delay, but we'll make sure everyone is well set to be able to continue the discussion. So on that note, have a great meeting. Merci.
Thank you, Sophie. Welcome, everyone. So my name is Rebecca Penn, and who am I? I've been working in harm reduction, doing harm reduction work in a bunch of different capacities for 20 years now. I don't know how that happened. Currently, I've just finished a contract working with health centers in Toronto, community health centers in Toronto, as they design and start implementing safer opioid supply programs. And I'm now transitioning to working for London Intercommunity Health Centre as a project lead for taking a community of practice, building a national community of practice for safer supply. So I'm really excited and very grateful that I was invited to moderate today and to welcome you today, because I'm really interested to learn and hear more about stimulants, benefits of stimulants, and all of that. But before we get going, I'd also like to wish everyone who's celebrating Eid Mubarak, and acknowledge it is the end of Ramadan today for those who are participating in that. Shay, have you started recording? Okay, so Shay is now recording, and if just some tips around privacy and such. You may want to rename yourself if you're putting things in the chat or in the question and answer. To get us started off right, I'd like us to begin with a land acknowledgement. And we have people today who are from all over Turtle Island, North America, Canada, United States, and Mexico. And not everyone may be familiar with land acknowledgements. So I just want to explain around what land acknowledgements are, and then give my land acknowledgement, and also invite you to include yours in the chat. So land acknowledgements are really about recognizing the land, and giving an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory that we reside on, and a way of honoring the Indigenous peoples who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. It's important to understand the long-standing history that has brought each of us to reside in these lands, and to seek to understand our place within that history. We need to speak explicitly about colonialism. Colonialism in the past, and as it continues in our present. It's a critical piece in the work that we do, and much of the work that we are each engaged in seeks to challenge structural powers and processes that criminalize, marginalize, oppress, and harm people and communities. And we need to identify and acknowledge not just the processes of the past, but also see how they operate in our present. And dismantling harmful drug policies, for example, as well as harmful health and social service policies and institutions, we need to do that deeper work of dismantling colonialism, racism, and other forms of oppression and violence. So I'm a settler. I'm currently living in Mexico on the traditional lands of the Chichimeca, Otomi, Purepecha, Mixteco, and the Zapoteco. I've also been living and working in the ancestral traditional territories of the Ojibwe, the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. These are part of the Dish with One Spoon territory, and were later covered by Upper Canada treaties. This land is the land that we now commonly refer to as Ontario. It's covered by 46 treaties, agreements, land purchases, and unceded territories. So I'm grateful to live and work on this land. Recognizing this in a meaningful way means making commitments to sharing and upholding responsibilities to all who now live on these lands, the land itself, water, the animals, the resources that make our lives possible. In our work, we need to always be mindful of these commitments. So we're all here from Turtle Island. Please, as I say, I invite you to put your name, introduce yourself in the chat, and include the names of the lands that you are from. Thank you. Okay, so the Stimulus Connect program. Stimulus is based in the Canadian Drug Policy Coalition and functions as a collaborative partnership with the Canadian Association of People Who Use Drugs and AIDQ. So this event has been organized through this partnership. And I'd like to acknowledge the people working in the background that have made this event possible. So we have Savannah from the Dr. Peter Center. Savannah, thank you. You'll be watching the chat for us. Emily is a harm reduction mover and shaker from Newfoundland. So you'll be looking at the Q&A for us. Kirsten is here from Nine Circles, Frankie from AQPSUD, and Natasha's not with us here, but from the Canadian Association of People Who Use Drugs. Kirsten, Frankie, and Natasha have also been instrumental in organizing today, so thank you. And of course, we also have Shay, the coordinator. Shay's doing all the background tech for us today. So yeah, cheers to you all. Quick housekeeping, social media types. We're using #StimulusConnect. And for our attendees today, you'll notice on your screen, there's two boxes. that you can use for interacting. So the first box I want to put your attention to is the chat box. And do you want to, Savannah, will you just put something in the chat for us so that you can know if you see a message from Savannah, that's the chat box. You can introduce yourself there, like I say. But we also have a Q&A box. That's the second box. And that's where you can stick some questions in. Please feel free to put in questions at any point during the presentation. We will be keeping an eye on those questions. You can also, what do you call it? Upvote questions, like liking them or whatever. And so we'll get to those questions. Emily and I will be taking care of that. And let's see, if you have any difficulties, tech difficulties, Shay's your person, let Shay know. And we are recording this, and the session will be available. The video will be posted on the Stimulus website within a couple of days. If you're having trouble hearing, think it may be related to the oral interpretation that's happening. So if you don't need it, you can just turn that off. I think it's probably off just as a default any which way. Shay's nodding. Yes, our panel today is going to be presenting in English, but we welcome questions in French. We have the amazing Sophie here who will help us, and Nick is here as well. So yeah, we're well covered that way. And also just a little plug for the Stimulus Connect website. There's lots of great resources there, and we'll be adding new resources. Shay will be adding more resources as we learn of them. So if there's anything you want to share that's a good resource for any of us, or that we hear from the presenters today, we can share those there. And finally, I'd like to ask that all of us attending the meeting today are coming here with an openness, with patience and kindness. There can be technical glitches, and there also could be ideas that are shared that don't sit comfortably with your own. And that's okay. I think we can all sail through this very smoothly if we approach this all with an open heart and kindness and patience. So yes, let's do that. Okay, so we have with us a panel of experts who are here to discuss the benefits of stimulants. Our panelists include Akia Munga and Kim Meyer, and we will also be having Dawn join us after, but I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Kim, Akia, I'll let you take it away.
Hi there. Yeah, I am Kim Meyer. Sorry, I think you're talking on mute. I apologize. I am the program coordinator at CSUN, which is a coalition of substance users of the North. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that we live, work, rest, and play on the unceded ancestral territory of the Lataco Dene Nation, otherwise known as Quesnel. So I'm the program coordinator, longtime stimulant user, and happy to be here and feed some questions.
Cool, thanks, Kim. Hey folks, my name is Akia Munga. I would like to acknowledge that I live in Toronto. I'm someone who's been coercively settled here on Broken Treaty 13, which is broken by the British Crown and is still heavily dominated by white supremacist ideology and pretty white supremacist government, which is also blocked and infringed on the rights of people who use drugs since the early 1900s, if not earlier. I'm on the territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. As someone who has been coercively settled here, I think it's really important that we acknowledge the way that Black people and Indigenous people and people of color are treated, especially with the heightened amount of police, law enforcement sanctioned violence against people who are Indigenous, Black, and Brown, especially people who use substances. So we are heavily marginalized because of colonization. And social work was something that was a derivative of colonization. So I think it's important when talking about education, and especially folks who are vulnerable and marginalized, what role, quote unquote, helping plays. Because social work was originally something that was created to help assimilation and to separate families. You can look at the 60s scoop for more. I am a Black with a capital B harm reduction worker and activist. I'm a polysubstance user, hella proud of it. And I like to say that I help facilitate change, you know? I think that's what harm reduction is about, facilitating healing and knowledge. I am part of the Royal Society of Canada. We're helping develop a policy brief for the Senate. I am part of Kaput, P2P, HRH, and I used to be part of THRA, like part of the steering committee. I think it's really important that we acknowledge the way that substance users are being treated here and in other places like the Philippines. Our lives are at risk and at stake. And this is more than just a conversation around stimulants and education. It's a conversation about life. Thank you.
Thank you both. So here we are to talk about the benefits of stimulants. I want to start, I think, by asking you both to talk about what are we talking about when we talk about stimulants? I think there's certain ways that stimulants are portrayed in the media, and they're not always what we expect them to be. And so, yeah, like, what are you thinking about when we say stimulants? What are you talking about, or what do you want to talk about when it comes to stimulants? What are they?
Kim, do you mind if I start? Or like, we can also like bounce back and forth, you know, where whenever ideas come and share the space. How does that feel?
Sounds good.
Okay, solid. Stimulants are like anything that that puts your central nervous system in hyperdrive, including caffeine, ephedrine, cocaine, MDMA, which is also like a psychoactive and empathogen, but like it's something that shares a couple different like classifications. Crystal meth, methamphetamines, Ritalin. Let's not forget about Ritalin, because a lot of people think that because it's not illicit, that means it's not a stimulant or a drug, and it is. It doesn't matter what label or like the hierarchy of substances, it is what it is. The hierarchy of substances is really about the way that people try to like pigeonhole or like stigmatize drug users, you know? So yeah, Kim, what do you think?
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with it as well, right? And I think when we speak of the word stimulants, we often think of, you know, illegal substances. And I like how you hit home on that Ritalin piece, right? You know, as a person who, you know, is clinically diagnosed with ADHD and relies on something like Ritalin, that is a stimulant that gives me the motivation, you know, to kind of get through the day. But I think, like you had mentioned, stimulants are often related with that illicit, illegal, immoral term. And I think having these conversations about what we even mean by the benefits of stimulants, right? Like you had mentioned coffee as well. And I think those are some of the forgotten ones, right?
Totally. Oh, also nicotine. Nicotine is also considered a stimulant too. So that's why sometimes when you want to have a smoke after, you know, going around bedtime or like, I don't know, some like stressful activity and you just want to feel chill, you also feel that boost. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And speaking of Ritalin, that's why safe supply is also so important. Because like if you can get a prescription for Ritalin, right? So why can't you get a prescription for safe supply if you are a crystal meth user or a cocaine user and you just want to change your relationship with substances, or maybe you want to cut down? Like it should be something available.
Yeah, I was going to speak to the fact that, you know, you have medical practitioners that, you know, people who use substances, they have that trouble getting any sort of, you know, amphetamine or stimulant for that matter. I mean, even if you are clinically diagnosed with something that would have that prescription medication, I mean, I unfortunately broke my foot last night, ended up in the hospital, and they have signs posted everywhere that say that they're not going to be prescribing narcotics or stimulants, and it's right posted on the wall in the hospital. And being someone that identifies as a person who's used drugs, like I couldn't even get something for pain relief for my foot without going into some big, long, exhausting battle that I didn't want to have at 10 o'clock at night. So yeah, certainly, I think there's a lot of still a lot of stigma, judgment, and some conversations to be had around people who use drugs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when talking about the medical, like I want to say medical industrial complex, because the medical institution and the pharmaceutical business behind it totally profits off of us, but yet doesn't allow us, and that's messed up. And it also depends on like your privilege and what you look like. Like, I doubt that the treatment that we would get, going into a hospital and asking for something, which is something legitimate and valid, would be different than someone, who had different privileges or was a settler, or, you know what I mean? Or I also don't want to assume, sorry. But like, I think it would be different given the privileges that we have and we don't have as people who use drugs, but also as human beings. So, so yeah.
It's interesting that you bring up we've gone very quickly to looking at both the medical, like legitimized stimulants, right? Like Ritalin. And in the chat bar, we have a couple of people referring to some others as well, Desoxin and I'd like us to go there. But before we go there, can we talk about a little bit more? Kim, you mentioned ADHD, ADD. What are the different reasons, or what are the different draws to stimulants do you see or hear about from people?
Like as a person who has ADHD, do you mean?
No, just like what attracts people to even try stimulants and then use them either sporadically, recreationally, or on an ongoing day-to-day basis?
Well, yeah, I think personally for myself, something, using something like a stimulant when you have those those impulsivity, lack of, or concentration. I mean, when you use something like a stimulant, you're counteracting that, right? So you're actually retaining focus. And then, people who naturally have that brain chemistry that, is hyperactive, or I'm all over the map, if I'm not taking my medication, something like Ritalin, which, is controlled, or crystal meth, which is not, is able to give me that focus and that motivation that sometimes is lacking with something like ADHD.
I totally feel you in terms of like motivation and focus. When I was younger, I was also diagnosed with ADHD, but looking back, I'm not sure if it was the right diagnosis for me, as Black people and people of color often get misdiagnosed and applied with medications for like most frequently against our and in my case against our needs and against our better interests. But yeah, I felt so much like I felt a boost. And Nick actually just joined. I saw that on the top. And coming in, Nick was talking about, before more folks got here, about dopamine and serotonin. And those are the pleasurable hormones, chemicals, biochemicals that are released when we do substances, both depressants and stimulants, and like psychoactives in general. Yeah, like I feel like it's different than a runner's high or like other natural highs because of the immediacy, because of the convenience, because of the accessibility, both emotionally, physically. It's cheap, it's something that is available, it can, like, depending on your use, but overall it's like it can be cheap. I mean, depending if it's
Ça peut
cocaine,
être quand même abordable. C'est sûr que la cocaïne, c'est plus cher. Mais moi, je ressentais
This feels good. And as opposed to getting therapy, not saying that substance use and the way that we use is illegitimate, but it's important that we look at ourselves holistically. I am like a super proud polysubstance user, and harm reduction is about use and also the way we use and what we combine it with. Some of us decide not to combine it with anything, and that's totally, sorry, I was gonna swear. That was totally cool. That's totally cool. And if people decide to like mix substance use with other therapeutic modalities, that's also totally cool. Um, it's more about our autonomy and what we want to do with ourselves and what we need. And you know, we sometimes we have like medical needs or diagnoses, and sometimes we're undiagnosed, and sometimes it's trauma, and sometimes it's nothing. But all of them are legitimate and valid. And so I think that's something that people don't associate with pharmaceuticals, like Kim was talking about. People don't think about that nuance when outside of a clinic. So yeah, I totally feel what you were what you were saying about that boost, and like it totally feels great, especially when things are going on, you know? Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to kind of speak to something there that you had mentioned about getting prescribed medication as a child.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever tried to seek it as an adult, but I know personally for myself, you know, trying to get those prescription medications, once you have that, you know, stigma behind, you know, substance use, is harder, right? Which is ironic, you know, as a child, they'll give it to you to control your symptoms. As an adult, when you try to seek it, it's harder, right? And so, you know, I have a psychiatrist that I see, and, you know, I really have to advocate for myself that medication is necessary. Otherwise, I have to go and seek it through like a safe supply doctor, and disclose, you know, my substance use history all over again, right? So I thought it was interesting that you had mentioned that, you know, as a child, but I mean, as a grown adult now, it's not the same for myself.
Yeah, a really interesting paradox there, isn't it?
Yeah.
I just want to point out a couple people have sent in a couple of questions here, but first of all, Carrie mentions in the chat that about like just the demands of every day and how stimulants help Carrie do complete what needs to be done and survive the demands of society today. Gives an extra 5 hours to the day kind of thing. So there's also that like pressure for us all to be performing and productive and all of that. I think that challenges people. Also Charlene, but before I get to Charlene's question, I just want to acknowledge that Dawn has joined us. Dawn, do you want to take a moment and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi. Hi, I'm Dawn Levand. I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba. I'm a substance user and a harm reduction advocate. I just believe that, well, as someone who uses drugs, I'm not entitled to the same safety, security, or stability as people who don't use drugs. And I just think in today's world, if we can be so accepting of different groups of people or different just difference, then why do we have to fight for people who use drugs to be considered people first and not the substances they use? And I love harm reduction, and I got into it because I'm sick and tired of seeing my friends and family and people I love and care about die before their time from what I see as 100% preventable deaths.
100%.
And if we know drugs have been here since the beginning of time, and we know the drugs are going to continue being here, then the least we can do is be better prepared for people who are going to use drugs, because not talking about it doesn't make it go away, and it often makes me believe that like denial is the biggest drug of all, right? Like by not actually acknowledging that people who use drugs are amongst us, and that they're actually like many of them are talented, skilled, versatile people, and I'd like to see more of like welcoming into the circle instead of pushing them out, because they have a lot to contribute to community and their homes and their families, and they need to be valued, honored, and respected. Yeah. Hi.
Thank you so much. Hi. That was powerful. Thank you. Wow. Absolutely. Safety is something that's so important. And you're right, it's something that we don't have. And it is a human right. And it is because we are not seen as human. Because, and you're right, drug use is an existential fact. And I say that a lot. It is a part of life. Elephants like eat rotten apples, foxes eat mushrooms. Like, there are spiritual reasons. There's like ayahuasca, there's kratom. Kratom not spiritual, but it's also something that's more natural. Coca leaves, like it's part of like a lot of cultural structure. It has a lot of culture behind it. And it also creates culture, like fashion. It creates community. It creates, you know, theory, dissertation. Books are written about us, and we are seen as invaluable. And Dawn, you're absolutely right. As someone who's Black, and I'm like it's nice to see like people of color talking about this, and really like telling our stories and advocating and really being about harm reduction, because being about it's important. Lip service kills us, because lip service is complicity. And when you're about it, you see it and you know. And the amount of carding that happens with us, the amount of police brutality, the lack of access to like housing, the lack of access to medication, the lack of access to safety, like physical safety, even because the market is so unregulated, because it's a Black market. We are 1 second. We are absolutely, we are entrenched in so much violence because of the lack of security, because it's unregulated, because it's a Black market, and because people think that we are not to be cared about. And that denial that we're people, I totally feel it. And I think that's something that a lot of people who are drug users feel. And there's nothing wrong with saying, you know, being a drug user, there's nothing wrong with it. And like, that's who I am. That's who we are. And that's why we have this knowledge. And that's why we have this lived experience. And it's about time that people value it, because we've lived life, we know. And there's a lot of beauty to the lives that we live, even though they may be hard.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that part about, you know, that we're humans, right? I just wanted to touch on that. You know, I used to work in a really government role before coming to CSUN and working for, you know, what's considered a drug user organization. And I used to go to these really like professional meetings, and I would ask people, like my pitch would be like, what's the difference between someone who uses drugs and someone who doesn't? And people would be like stumped, and they'd be just staring at me. And then I'd be like, absolutely fucking nothing, and usually walk out of the room, right? Because it was just like, it was such a self-defeating battle. But I love that you spoke about that.
Very much that, nothing, absolutely nothing. Yeah.
Well, and it is interesting. Like I'm seeing in the chat here, Alexandra has posted about like the differences between crack and cocaine, like the differences in stigma. And Akia, you referred earlier to like the hierarchies, right, of different drugs and such. Charlene's asked a question. Could you talk a bit about the benefit of stimulants in an entrenched circumstance that you might encounter when working with populations of people who use substances? So I'm thinking that Charlene, you'll need to correct me in the question or in the chats here. I'm thinking you're referring to more like the, you know, like the street involved and like that kind of group of people, as opposed to the people who might do stimulants on Friday nights when they're going clubbing or something. Am I correct in that?
There's no difference. Yeah.
Do you want to speak to that, Kim or Akia? Or Dawn? Sorry.
Oh, Dawn. Yeah. Sorry. Come through.
Dawn.
Hey, so this year we'll use stimulants. I needed it because I was homeless for a good part of the year, it seemed like as soon as people found out that I was using drugs, then I lost everything. And it's not because of the drugs that I lost everything. It was just, I don't know how things happened. And like stimulants helped me stay awake. They helped me because it seems like once you fell asleep, that's when you're the most vulnerable. And when you're the most vulnerable is when, you know, people can take your stuff. And sometimes that's all the stuff you have. I mean, like my joke is that on the street, there's like a 2-bag policy. You have like one bag that's your house and one bag that's your daily bag. And then you take your daily bag with you everywhere and you try and leave your house at different spots or whatever. But sleep was a privilege and a luxury that at that time I couldn't afford. And it's one of those weird things too, where it's like, as a kid, I remember when I got in trouble, I wasn't allowed to go outside and play. I used to be like really bummed about that. And it's weird because as an adult, the new punishment is like, you know, you can't come inside. So you can't go inside to go to the washroom. You can't go inside to, you know, experience the warmth or togetherness that other people are experiencing. And it's just, those are some of the differences I noticed while being homeless this year. And like only recently became like was less homeless. And I guess like it's still a very close reality for me. And I mean, last year I had like 5 jobs. So I mean, I remember at that time when I had those 5 jobs, like this like impending sense of like, don't be homeless, don't be homeless. And like, then like not even like 6 months later, I was like hella homeless. And I also think too, it also helps people who need to be hyper vigilant for their safety. So like if you're like a working girl or something, then, you know, I find that crystal meth kind of helps me, I don't know, be more keen on my senses. And I also for me, I mean, I never stop thinking. So at least it helps me be at the same pace that all the thoughts are coming in. And yeah, that helps. And sometimes, and when I was going through my separation with my husband, it also helped me kind of like not turn off my feelings or my emotions to like the reality of what's going on, but like it helped me mute them. So like, yeah, I still had them, but they weren't like present, and I wasn't like overwhelmingly like, you know, bereft with grief and loss, right? And so like it just helped me be like, yeah, that stuff is there, but I don't need to deal with it right now. And then like I was able to take care of all the other things, and it also helped me get out of bed. I remember when I met with my son's social worker, and she was like, well, the only part of your plan is that you have to quit drugs. And I was like, what if I don't? What if I don't quit drugs? What if I don't go about the process the way you think I should? And then what are the consequences? And it's just like, what if I'm not a drug addict? What if I'm a drug user? What if there's a difference? And like I forgot where I was going there, but I mean like something about drugs for sure. But thank you so much. And when I can remember it, maybe I'll finish that thought. But anyone else?
Well, I really like that you pointed out around the difference between thinking about people who use stimulants as addicts versus users. Like you just described, Dawn, so beautifully the way that there was this tool that helped you stay awake, that helped you stay safe, that helped you get some of your needs met psychologically, emotionally, structurally, physically, socially, like all of it. And we often think of these drugs as, you know, these evil, horrible things, but actually it was a tool for you to survive where you are. And the really shitty piece of it is it also puts you at risk of criminalization, of losing children, of all of that stuff. So it's a real double-edged sword, but it's not the drug that's the double-edged sword, is it? It's the context. And like, yeah, if you were the drug user using legitimized, prescribed Ritalin, for example, then like you wouldn't be at risk of losing your kid and things like that. Yeah, Dawn.
It's also one of those things where it's like we have a really negative, pronounced like history towards drugs. Like ever since the war on drugs came out, then like that's where we gained most of our knowledge from about drugs. So drugs are bad, and then it creates crime, and people who do drugs are criminals. And so then that's been the underlying theme and current of thought towards people who use drugs for the last 60 years. So I remember this one time I was speaking with a drug dealer once, and he was telling me about how he had strong convictions about selling to people who are minors or women who are pregnant, or like just listing his convictions off. And I was like, has anyone ever told you you do a good job? And he was just like, no, I poison my community. Like I sell my community poison, and like they poison themselves, and then I make money from that. And I was like, well, what if the people who came to you to buy drugs came to you because they knew you, and they knew the source that they were getting it from, and they knew that the kind of person you were valued quality over quantity? And then what if your convictions meant that because you didn't sell to minors, that you reduce the risk of overdose or like deaths like that at an early onset age? And like it was the first time he'd ever been told that maybe he'd done a good job, and that maybe like his convictions you know, you could still do, you know, what I guess regular society would be like bad people do. And they have this ridiculous idea that good people don't. I know lots of good people that do. And I don't know. I just wish that we could change our attitudes about our perspective on drugs and drug use and people who use drugs. Because I mean, like, I don't lie, cheat, steal, or anything like that. I just I haven't even changed much since I do drugs. I mean, like, I'm not like you know, running naked down the street, or you know, that kind of madness. Though the thought has crossed my mind from time to time. Sorry. But thanks so much for letting me share again.
The sharing is appreciated. There's messages in the chat saying how much people are appreciating you sharing your personal experiences and perspectives. So thank you, Dawn. One of the questions that was sent in earlier, we've kind of already addressed this, but I'd like us to take this one head on, is drug use a form of escapism that interferes with physical, mental, and spiritual well-being?
Oh, can I answer that question?
Thank you.
Okay, awesome. And also I'd like to build on the war on drugs. The war on drugs was initially a racist endeavor perpetuated by the government to make sure that marginalized communities were criminalized. And then they implemented the strike policy. And then it was to fuel the amount of bodies, our bodies, for the prison industrial complex. So like, and also like the things that we do because we're using might not necessarily be because of use. And that's something that a lot of people agree on. And sometimes it might be, but it more likely can be like, is like sleep deprivation or like trauma. And I just wanted to include that just to build on that. And sometimes like it might be the perception of people who expect that of drug users. And then they're surprised when we don't. And it's really effing awesome to surprise people in that way that really illustrates that we're not bad. Our stories aren't bad, because like, I feel you, I was homeless, it was fucked up. Sorry, I realize that we're like open and recording. And things help you get by, absolutely. But to talk about escapism, when you are meditating, or a trigger warning, I'm going to speak about things that are like bodily injurious, like with intention. Is that something that that triggers people? Because if not, I can just reform my thoughts. No. I just want to, okay. Self-harm, for example. Self-harm, substance use is currently considered a concurrent disorder. And there are a lot of different disorders. And substance use, like self-harm, it can also be considered a concurrent disorder dependent. People don't talk about that as escapism. There's also its own stigma, you know, with self-harm, but people don't view that as spiritual escapism. People, you know, there's the stigma about sadomasochism, and there's a lot of negative connotations with self-harm, and that's like a whole different talk. But I don't think so. When we meditate, or if we get stoned and meditate, what's wrong with that? It's not escapism if you're doing something mindfully, you know? Also, because it's legal, people have changed their ideas. Now weed is accepted, now pot is accepted, but the same stigma was around, like, was attached to marijuana, you know, reefer madness, the propaganda, you know, birth of a nation, like all of those things were like accumulated around substances as an idea. And so people do the same with our drugs. But if you are okay, why does that matter?
I also wonder, though, what's wrong with escapism? Like Hollywood, movies,
Very much.
TV, like, what do you think I do Friday night? Glass of wine,
Like binge watch, like
6 hours of,
Yeah.
you know, binge watching television series. Like,
yeah,
it's
like,
escapism, right? Or a kid dressing up. Like, I guess I really struggle with the idea that escapism is bad. And I really struggle with the idea that escapism is bad for people whose lives have been overwhelmed by trauma and violence, like, and loss and grief. You know, one thing we're talking about a lot these days is the serious amount of loss that we're facing with our community members, our friends, our loved ones. Just this past week's been devastating in Toronto. And to want a bit of escape from that pain for a little bit, like, I don't know why that's problematic. It doesn't mean you don't address it or live with it. It's but taking a break from it, how is that not possibly spiritually, physically, and mentally helpful? Dawn, your hand's up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm one of those crazy folks that doesn't believe that using drugs separates me from my spirit. And so I still do all the things that I would do even if I wasn't using drugs. So like I still sing, I still drum, I still smudge, and I still like I figure that if I can't do those things, then yeah, I do have a problem. If I can't continue to function the way I would function without drugs, then that's a concern. The other thing was the whole like marijuana was once criminalized. Like when it became decriminalized, you know, kudos to Canada, congratulations. But at the exact same time too, I mean, what he should have done was, you know, erased everyone's like record that said that they went to jail for marijuana. And then also, what they should have done? They should have segued or grandfathered in the people that used to run that game to doing it professionally or whatever, because then you'd have a wealth of expertise, knowledge at your fingertips. And then the other thing is like Trudeau can't erase the memories of being in a drug bust at 15 when they used to treat marijuana like cocaine. And so then like that's like, you know, balaclavas, freaking semi-automatic rifles, and like it's like thanks. And there was something else that that was said, but oh right, altered state of mind. So people say that when you use substances, that you're altering your state of mind, and then that somehow separates you from your spirit and makes you less spiritual in some capacity. I don't think that at all, because I mean, when we pray, that's an altered state of mind. When we gather together and worship and praise or whatever, that's an altered state of mind. When you sing, it's a different, you know, you've altered your state of mind. And so then where is the line between an altered state of mind and prayer and holiness versus in prayer and using substances. The way I see it was that substances were used historically as a means of gaining a higher attunement to how we fit in the universe and how we connect to our spirit, our creator. And yeah, nowadays we do use it for escapism, but I mean, like, look at the hot mess we're in, really.
Kim, you had your hand up. Thanks.
Yeah, that was awesome, Dawn. I'm going really far back, but I really wanted to mention it. So we were talking about, the benefits of stimulant use amongst people who are, on the street, and I think that for myself, like, that's not a part of my story, and I acknowledge that, but I think that for myself, and something I've noticed, or even personally, is the social aspect of stimulants as well, right? And so when people are seeking that connection, or I'm speaking for myself, seeking that connection, finding often finding a group of people who use stimulants and joining that sort of social aspect sometimes is beneficial as well, right? And so I think oftentimes that piece is missed. Not that it's the only reason that I've used stimulants, past or presently, but I definitely think it offers a connection, and for people who do live on the street, right, having those places that they can go and engage in that use is also a place of safety for them as well.
Good points. Good points. So, all right. So,
Sorry, 1 second.
yeah.
I just want to jump on that real quick.
Yeah.
Talking about the social aspect, and also the difference between prayer, meditation, and quote unquote holiness. When people are doing things as a group, there's a different stigma attached to them. For example, when one person, like one Black person, is smoking weed, they're a pothead. And we're also stigmatizing members of our own community, which doesn't make any sense. And when a group of us are smoking weed, it's a gang. Or when one person is smoking weed, it's called, like, I don't use this word, meth head. But when a group of them are smoking, or group of us, people, humans, are smoking meth together, they are considered suspicious, or one person can be considered suspicious based on the different substance they use. But they activate the same synapses, the same nerves, the same glands, like it's all the same ultimately, like biochemically. And also, I feel like the difference between like escapism and like meditation and holiness, it's like I don't consider myself holy, and like people that do, that's just, like that's the way they feel about themselves. And like meditation is something that we do, and escapism is, also something that we do. Like ultimately their activities, and our autonomy is the most important. And so, yeah, I just wanted to build on that, to say, like, I think that we put so much pressure on our own communities to attain this model minority of what substance use looks like, because we want to avoid stigma for a second. But that's not the point. The point is we shouldn't have to avoid stigma. The point is that there is stigma. And that's what we should work on. I feel like that's why we are in this like global place right now. It's because we're not seeing each other as human. We're not seeing each other as autonomous beings, and we're not really caring about each other. And once again, harm reduction is about decolonization and care, and that healing movement, and non-judgment. And not to say that you need to tolerate abuse, but to say that what you do is important. It's not about what you put in your body. Nothing you put in your body makes you dirty. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to like go on like for that hot minute. Just, yeah, I know you had a point. I just wanted to jump on real quick. Sorry.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're all hearting you. Absolutely. Thank you, Akia. I think one of the pieces, okay, so there's different things, right? Like we use different substances for different effects. And sometimes the effect we're looking for is that euphoria or that escapism or whatever. Sometimes it's around like functioning. So needing that like focus that you referred to, Kim, or that type of a thing. But then we're also seeing in the media, about like people like attacking each other and trying to eat each other, like all that, like super, like a lot of violence happening. So that, like, that's the stuff that we're hearing about, right? Like not these benefits, but these harms. So how do we get across that bridge of those two ideas around stimulants? And then what do we do with the group that are experiencing a lot of violence and having some of that, like the problems that come from using a lot of a stimulant like meth, that's criminalized, and people are criminalized for using it. And so, yeah, I'm rambling a bit here, but so help me out. Do you know where I'm getting at? Am I clear enough in what I'm trying to?
Well, I was going to say, like, what we need to do is like decriminalize drugs. First of all, we need to house people. We need these very basic social issues. I think would correlate a lot to people who have those violent tendencies towards problematic substance use. Right. A lot of it stems from other things like nourishment and water and lack of sleep. And if they don't have access to those, how can just because you use something like crystal meth that has those adverse side effects doesn't mean that it has to be that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very that, absolutely, Kim. Like I was snapping. Absolutely, we need access to the basics pronto. And I think that's what decrim and legalization is about. It's about creating access to those, to make that a need that we can grab for. That's what harm reduction also and legalization tied together is about. It's about educating folks and then them understanding that our quality of life is important, and then them recognizing that our rights should be respected. That housing first model is important because drug use shouldn't destabilize your housing. Do you keep it clean? Is it intact? And if it's not clean, do you have mental health issues? Are you having a long day? You have the right to have something that might not look perfect that is yours. You have the right to be able to open your fridge and feel comfortable. You have the right to know where you lay your head at night. And these are rights that are denied to us, or it's like almost like carrot stick, but there's no carrot. And that's what we're being led by, this promise of something, and it's nothing, and we know it, and we're fighting for more, and we need more. And if people understood that we need more because we deserve it, because we're people, then I think they would understand. If they actually looked at us instead of looking away or looking down, like they would see us, and we deserve to be seen. People know, like, we've been talking like this. I've lost so many people. I'm not going to do this here. Sorry. People are fucking dying, and we've been screaming for over a decade, and it's enough. And things need to change. Period. Because people are dying, and that is important. And the fact that it isn't important to some people means that they're not listening and they're not seeing us. And we can fix that. Just let us fucking fix it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Akia. I think emotion is sometimes it's necessary, right? And we've also lost a lot of personal people in the community here. Personally, in my life, I've lost a lot of people, and it hurts, right? And as somebody who uses substance, there's a risk associated with us every time we use those substances. And having those safer supply options and having regulated options.
Sans avoir ces options d'approvisionnement sécuritaire, les gens vont continuer à mourir.
Into our body that's not regulated or where we're getting it from, right? And that's the reality. And substance use is so criminalized. And I have a personal relationship in my life with a young Indigenous male who's been in and out of the criminal justice system, aged out of foster care, part of the 60s scoop, has been a long-time crystal meth user. And I had a conversation with him again. He's incarcerated again last night, and we were talking, and I started talking about safer supply and what that meant, and he had absolutely no idea that things like this existed, but rather he gets stuck in the perpetual cycle of being in jail and being criminalized for simple theft charges that relate to just meeting his basic needs, right? And those are the conversations that we need to have, that there are options, safer supply options, so that we're not just seeing a cycle of people that are filtering through the criminal justice system, like doing these life sentences on little installments just to get their basic needs met.
Thank you both. Thank you both. There's a question from Graham that I'd like to ask. Graham, hold on one more moment. I just want to acknowledge I see your question. Kim and Akia, I'm thinking about my work in safer opioid supply. So I've been really focused in on the safer opioid supply, because that seemed that there's been so much more action around safer opioid supply, and I think that's been partially because it's a nice, like, it looks like a nice response to directly address the opioid crisis, the toxic drug supply crisis. I'm wondering, one of the things I hear people struggle with when thinking about safer stimulant supply is the differences in the way that stimulants are used. So for some people who are using stimulants for that functioning, right, like that concentration, focus, a bit of relief, being able to put some hard feelings down for a few minutes so you can concentrate on something else, that maybe safer stimulant supply would work in that sense for that group of people, but it wouldn't be helpful for people who are looking to go like on a run for a weekend or something like that, right? It's not like opioids you can prescribe every 12 hours or 4 hours or whatever. But it's not as good for that, like those binges or runs.
So are you saying potentially that the stimulants aren't good for those binges, or sorry?
No, I'm asking like what your thoughts are around.
Oh hell yeah, you could abuse prescription medications over a weekend and get the same euphoric feeling, speaking from experience, right? Like, if you're not taking those medications properly, absolutely there's a reality that you could abuse them, so to speak, to get that feeling from a prescription medication, absolutely.
But in terms of prescribing, it gets more complicated.
Yeah, and I've noticed that with some of the safer supply prescribing here, you know what I mean? People who are using a lot of stimulants in a day, something like 4 or 5 dexedrine in a day, is what going to get you through a couple of hours. Like, there's really no comparison, but doctors are having that hard time, like you mentioned, prescribing higher amounts of those amphetamines, right? But definitely I think it would be helpful as somebody who uses stimulants if you were able to get a more comparable medication rather than having to abuse the little amounts that you do get, right?
Right. Okay, so Graham, let me get to your question. I'm tuning in from Scotland, Graham says, and wondered if you guys can see a point where we could create a multi-country approach to harm reduction and substance use. A cohesive effort may provide better results. Currently, the divisive rhetoric creates a moral apartheid around drug use, where stimulants are fine for medicinal purposes, but not for recreational purposes. No reason why escapism should be used to dehumanize. Any thoughts about that, like, yeah, multi-country approach?
Yeah, I like that. I like that, right? Like I like that whole sentiment, right? A multi-country approach. I think, you know, we've seen other countries do things that work, and we're, you know, I find in Canada here, anyways, you know, or even provincially, we're a lot slower to adapt to things that are working elsewhere, right? Like you look at countries like Portugal that have adopted that philosophy years ago, and how well it's doing. You know, when we decriminalize, but they're not being done. And that's very interesting around the stimulants are allowed to be used for not for recreational, right? You know, and I use stimulants regardless if it's for fun or necessary or to function. And I think, you know, that just kind of creates like this sort of like, you're allowed to use it if this, right? And yeah.
And we have another question here. Or Akia, did you want to say anything? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I was muted. In terms of a multinational approach, first we need to look at all of our legislation that touches drug use. And I actually wrote this down like a little while ago because I'm doing the policy brief. And I was originally writing this for safe supply. And then this policy brief came and I took pieces. I'm like, could this be used? How can I use this idea around safe supply to talk about full decriminalization and legalization? Because in essence, safe supply is like a nascent decriminalization or legalization. It's allowing folks to be able to purchase something that is an equivalent of their current use, because, you know, a fentanyl is also very difficult. I used to do a lot of fentanyl. And so like my safe supply is like, it's pretty hefty. And so it's still legal and it's equivalent. So in terms of like opiate, like correlation, it matches. And it might not feel the same, but my body is not sick. And that idea is something that we, like, as people who use drugs, and I'm a polysubstance user. I said it before already, but as a polysubstance user, being able to have that as something that I don't have to worry about, I don't have to, you know, I can work it into my schedule. It can be something that it can be a part of my life as opposed to part of my shadow. And in terms of a multinational approach, if we all implement safe supply, let's say, because I'm going to Michigan soon in August to talk about safe supply with a few folks, because the United States has been hit. There's been so many deaths. There's like the estimate is like 500,000, but that's not also counting like people who have been incarcerated and died. That's not including people who have died of like a quote unquote heart attack, or died from the complications around prohibition, because it's not drug use. It's about our toxic supply. So that is a key difference that a lot of people don't look at. And so if we all implement safe supply, what's the difference? Let's say we look at all of the legislation that includes drug use and we repeal that. That creates a legality. If we need to look at also like the legalization culture that previously exists, because it exists in different parts of the United States. Weed is used in a lot of different places. There's like so much shit going on with McKeeson and like Purdue and no, not McKeeson, McKinley, sorry. And like the Sackler family and all of that. I was going through, I have alerts and I was going through and I saw this like really fake website and I'm like, oh shit, that's fake. So also be careful and do some research and listen to people who use drugs when looking for the answers. But yeah, legalize, look at the culture that already exists, repeal laws, which will also grant amnesty. We can find money to be able to house people if we divest funds from the police department, like which also heavily criminalizes people who use drugs. We can use that to pay for like busing system, taxes, necessities, and we can still create safety, because if you look at, like Kim mentioned, Portugal, there's also Spain and Switzerland. When you look at their numbers of like substance use reduction, if you look at their statistics, drug use actually went down. Like problematic drug use went down, overdose went down. And why? Because the supply isn't toxic. That's what people are scared of, the death. And we can prevent the death. So if we can prevent the death, that means that drugs aren't bad. They're not toxic, and they never were bad. They're just toxic. And so if we do that, then there is safety. So it's there. Yeah, thanks. Sorry, that was like.
No, that's great. And it goes really nicely with the next question I have from our attendees. We've got a question here. With regard to illegal stimulants, what would the ideal framework for change look like? And what is the best case scenario with regard to outcomes, like decriminalization or legalization, government controlled distribution, or private sector retail sale? What are your thoughts on that?
Kim, do you want to go? I can go.
No, I saw you unmuted. You can go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Thanks. So with private sector, with privatization, you always have the same problem of capital. When capitalism gets involved, things go wrong. Capitalism is already involved, and privatization is already happening. With safe supply, privatization is happening because the pharmaceutical companies are creating these. And let's say in the United States, because in here in Canada, there's OHIP. So the medical institution is a bit different, where we don't have to pay out of pocket for care unless it's something like extraneous, like a medication that isn't covered, and so many medications are covered that are necessary. And it's really hard for us to pay for our medications and then anything else. Because that's privatized and you have to pay out of pocket, the pharmaceutical companies are benefiting from the amount of safe supply, the amount of medications that they can give out. And so that means that if you don't have money, you can't have access to your safe supply. So that's the problem with privatization. It's based on capital, not on need. And when you base things on capital, that means people will get marginalized because of colonization and all of the different systemic issues that we're currently living under and we're trying to recover from. And if something is now if it's more public, there's access, and also the idea of decriminalization is legal, and legalization is, it's for everyone. Drug use is for everyone. It is accessible, using what you want, autonomy, making yourself feel good, treating yourself, like psychedelics are used for a lot of therapeutic reasons. MDMA was created as an empathogen in the 70s. Crystal meth was created in the 70s. Like, these things were created for usually therapeutic or functional purposes. And they still have that quality. It's just that because they are not profitable, because they won't benefit the companies that create things that are comparable, then that's one of the reasons why they're deemed bad. And so that's why I don't think personally that privatization is like a good thing. Yeah, thanks. Kim, all you.
Yeah, I think you hit a lot of the same points that I was going to hit. And, you mentioned OHIP, and, we're here in BC, and that's the battle that we get trapped in often, right? It's like, why are we going to give people who use drugs free drugs? And, if you're low income or, on any sort of assistance in BC, then all your medications are covered. And people don't realize that, giving pharmaceutical equivalents, whether they're getting antibiotics or stimulants or opiates, you know, they're still getting them for free, right? And, you know, when you're still having those conversations with sometimes people who are still, you know, stuck in that tunnel vision, right? You know, the whole giving addicts free drugs. And there was a comment on the side that I read as well, something along the lines of like, how do we get people who use drugs like to not use them? Like, or like, what are they, what the, something about like happiness or something. I actually think it was from my stepdad, which is totally fine. But like it was something along the lines of like, you know, I'm still looking to expand some minds, right? Because it's inherently, I think, you know, I'm alienated from my family because of my relationship with substances and people that I've had in my life with this relationship with substances, except for my mom and stepdad. Shout out to them who are actually watching this. You know, and it really comes down to a lot of like stigma and shame that are keeping people kind of, you know, in the dark, right? And when we do step into our truths about substance use and have those conversations, you know, do I think that I'll ever stop using substances? No, that's reality, and that is how I've incorporated it as you know, into a part of my life, and I'm where the most successful or the most motivated I've ever been in my life, and I'm just not at that point where I have to justify, rationalize, or stop doing things that that ultimately bring me happiness, right?
Absolutely, and you're not hurting anybody. When people think about drug use, they pathologize this, they demonize this, and the first thing that they think is violence. Cut to 80s crack fear and propaganda, and the drug war and racism, and there's that inherent danger of Black bodies and POC bodies and bodies that are poor and bodies that are traumatized, and these are also the bodies that use drugs. We're the people who use drugs, and so that violence automatically translates, and that's stigma, and so that's a lot of the fear right now, and that's a lot of the fear that like around the culture of prohibition. With alcohol, it was the same thing, and alcohol was poisoning people, and so they distilled that. They almost like they took a cultural community sieve. They sieved out the fear. They looked at the problem, and then they applied something. They didn't have the stigma and the problem together. So we have to attack the stigma, and then you will see the substance for what it is. And that's where a lot of that that fear and that shame comes from. Yeah, yeah, all the things.
Apologies. Some great things happening in the chats and in the questions here as well. So I think, Robert, I think we've kind of talked about your question about how, like, would we do like prescription like we did with medical cannabis, and then like that, take that kind of approach. Is there anything further, Akia or Kim, that you'd like to mention about that? Are we
No,
good?
yeah, no card, like no legal prescription for some people carrying my card around saying I can use it. I mean, just across the board, it's accessible. It's you know, and it works for people, right? Like I don't want to carry a card around saying that I'm allowed to have this, and that person who doesn't have a card who might not, you know what I mean? I just want it to be accessible across the board.
Barrier. Yeah.
And then, oh, sorry. And then next thing you know, you don't have your card, and then you get incarcerated, and then that leads to carding with cards. Like it's a bad scene.
Yeah. So a question was asked a little bit ago about what is a polysubstance user? And I gave the quick textbooky kind of thing, but I'm wondering if Akia, you're someone who's just said that you're a polysubstance user. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, like what that actually means, how that works, why that works for you?
Yeah, more than one, like polyamorous, polygram, substance. so polysubstance user. And that includes, I believe that includes things like pharmaceuticals, that includes espresso, that includes, because for me, substances are substances, period. That includes cocaine, that includes kratom, that includes, and what the substances that I do are, because I've done and I do substances, that is not a relevant question, because when you're asking that, and like the reason I'm speaking here is quite obvious, and the reason if you see me speaking on opioids or about opioids, the reason is also self-evident. And like that is that's something that works for me because it's something that meets my needs. It's something that I like. I have a really healthy relationship with substances, you know? I will sleep if I'm feeling too amped up. I make sure that the substances that I'm using are from someone who's reliable. You know, if you can get it tested. I'm not someone who is scared to say, I'm not feeling good. Let me do some work and see where I'm at. You know, make sure, and Kim said it, water, food, air, shelter. These are things that help you regardless. And if your health is good, your trip is most likely going to be better, regardless of what it is.
Thank you. I think it's also interesting when we're talking about harm reduction and interventions and such to support and make things healthier, lower risk for people. I find that it's often like things are looked at as one or the other, like stimulants versus opioids, and that's been a big thing for like the work that I've been doing is safer opioid supply, right? And you saw where the safer opioid supply was partially to divert people from the illegal drug supply by providing them with a pharmaceutical opioid of known quantity, quality, potency, all of that kind of thing. But people were still using substances from the illegal drug supply because they're only being provided the opioid, not necessarily, addressing the stimulants. So I'm not sure if we want, can we talk for a moment about how the opioids and stimulants work together? We got a question asking about strategies for coming off of stimulants in ways that aren't overly negative. So the reason I'm bringing this question together with what I'm saying is because of how some people do use stimulants to help them with their use of opioids, and opioids to help them with the coming down from stimulants. Can I pass that to you?
Sorry, I lost volume on my computer. I apologize. Oh no, I can't hear anything.
You're all right now?
Okay,
No,
there you go. Now I can. Oh no, we're having technical problems. There we go.
You're good. So I was just asking about how people use opioids and stimulants together, or another way, if not opioids, like down and stimulants, how they work together. And are there any tips around the question we got, are there any strategies for limiting use and or coming off of stimulants without that being overly negative? And I'm not sure what that question actually means. Like I'm just reading a question that was sent in prior to the meeting. So I'm not sure if they mean coming off, like if you've been using it regularly, or if they mean like coming down.
Yeah, okay. I was kind of lost in where that question was. As someone who's never been a polysubstance user, I've never really understood that, right? Like I've never understood the combination of the two of them. So I don't really want to speak to that. I don't know, Akia, if you want to speak to that, because I was really always confused by that.
Sorry, my battery's at 10%. I was just fiddling with the charger. It's okay though. Is it? I'll figure it out. Because like this is important. Also, like vaccinating is important, but also like harm reduction and education is important. Because stigma is real. Sorry. Yeah. So with polysubstance use, there's like pharmacokinetics. And it's so the way, like the biological and physiological interplay of substances. Let's say you are, you're like out and you're having a good night or whatever, and you do some cocaine, or some ketamine, and you do a Valium. With ketamine and the Valium, it will act differently than the cocaine and the Valium. Because one is a central nervous system depressant. Oh, pardon? Pardon? I'm not sure if I heard something. Oh, okay. Yeah, so with the ketamine and the Valium, one is not exactly a depressant, but it does depress your central nervous system. It's more like a dissociative tranquilizer kind of thing. And so there will be some type of, there'll be some synergy between something that depresses your central nervous system and a benzodiazepine like Valium, which also depresses your central nervous system, versus cocaine and Valium. With the upper, it shoots up your central nervous system, and then the other one depresses it. So the feelings kind of counterbalance, but the different side effects might not be exactly the way that you anticipate. So just because you take a downer and then you do some coke doesn't mean that you're gonna feel like exactly like you haven't done anything. Depending on what you do, sometimes that effect can be achieved, but it's something that each person has to play around. If they do, be safe and ensure that you check in with someone else, because sometimes things synergize, and we're in an opioid catastrophe where it's like a global, it's a shit show. It's carnage. It's really bad, and it's really important to be safe as much as you can. Yeah, pharmacokinetics, things work differently. So if you can, be with someone else, and if you experiment, be safe.
Sorry, Aki, I just wanted to speak on that really quickly. I'm so sorry if I offended you at all. I didn't know if I had. I was saying it from a totally joking point, which, with the toxicity of the drugs, like, I want to hang out and party, and all of a sudden, and now we're doing a downer and we're having a nap. Like, that was always the worst for me, in my party stages, is I was like, because I never really understood the correlation that way, kind of more in like a social way. So I apologize.
It's all good. It's all good. No offense taken.
The question was further elaborated on in terms of like that come down. What are some strategies to support people or to help people navigate on their own, whichever, that coming down after you've been on stimulants?
I don't know. I think like hydration, food, fresh air, like the things that you don't want to do. Like I find personally for myself anyways, if I've, been on a tear, or, things are feeling a bit messy, but I think, the isolation, the sitting in the dark and stuff are not helpful. I mean, because we've just provoked those receptors of happiness. And then again, fresh air, water, food, those are the things that I really, really preach if somebody is wanting to come, off a bad run, maybe a bad run.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't do a lot of like the napping, but I totally understand sometimes it's like people expect it to be like a snap too. And it's not always like that. And ensure that the people you're around understand wholly and fully informed consent, because you're going to be in like different states. And if you can, like you should, when you're with people and you're high, You know, it lowers your inhibition sometimes. Sometimes it might make you more tense depending on who you are. But, you know, it's important that consent is something that is understood for touch, for language. If you have like complex PTSD or any form of trauma or sensitivity or anxiety, like all that shit. Make sure that people around you understand consent. I find checking in if you're doing opioids is important. Sometimes setting a timer if you're by yourself and you're on the nod. Make sure that you have something that can wake you up if you're alone, unfortunately, and you're like in a bathroom or something. And if you can't call someone, set a timer. So if you're in a deep nod, at least there's something that might try to wake you up. Set a couple if you need, and call someone. There's like an app. There are a few different overdose apps, but I feel like it's not like super duper effective. There was one that St. Michael's was developing, but I don't have a link for that. I can try to find one and send it off. And if Rebecca wants to like send it to people, I'm not sure if participants signed up or something. But if there's like a way that that they can get that, I'll try and get that to folks. For psychedelics, make sure that you have a trip sitter if you've never done psychedelics before. You know, try to be in a good mental health space. You know, if it's your first time and you don't want something to be too intense, avoid like things with a lot of bright visuals, because things are going to move and breathe. And with MDMA, there's tracers. So if you have something like seizures or any type of motion sickness, it's important to be careful. If you're like going out partying and dancing and it's your first time or something. Yeah. And yeah, those are like the general ones. Drink lots of water, and try to have fun if you can, when you can. Yeah.
We just lost Rebecca for a bit. Remember, everybody, I'm Che. Oh, Rebecca's back.
Yeah.
Did anybody want to add to what Akia just said? Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to do this willy-nilly, Rebecca, is I'm actually going to launch the poll, because I know we were about to just do that. So the poll is super short. It's 4 questions. Everybody can answer it. They're all questions that are easy to answer, like which province or territory. Graham, you get your first one, which is outside of Canada. And at the end of the polling, we'll share you the results. So I just have a question. Dawn, you're back. Is there anything you wanted to add into the conversation? I know you've been having some tech problems, and I totally acknowledge that shit happens. It's fine. But did you, was there anything you wanted to make sure? Oh.
Anything I wanted to add to the conversation? What was the last thing that you guys were talking about?
Safe ways to come off stimulants, I think it was. And then it just kind of
either up and down or coming off entirely.
Okay.
You can think about it.
When I quit stimulants, I quit them both on my own twice. And both times we just had to like make a decision that was something we're not going to do. And then we pretty much like camped in our living room. We made the pull-out couch like a little island. We slept a lot. We took turns making food for each other. And then, yeah, it took about 2 weeks to come off, but safe way to do it. I guess just let people know that that's something you're doing, so that, you know, if they don't hear or see from you for a little bit, then they can check in once in a while.
That's great. One of the questions that came in, so this question is going to be for you, Akia. Hopefully you figured out plugged in. You're plugged in and sorted.
I got 6% and I can figure it out. It's all good.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to ask this question, and if we lose you, we'll come back. What does substance positive drug education look like specifically in regard to chemsex or party and play?
The identify as agender, but I do have male passing privilege, which I acknowledge. And I get misgendered a hell of a lot, which sucks. But with chemsex and party and play, there is, it's really important, once again, sorry, there's like some background noise. Or 1 second, let me close the window. Sorry about that. So, okay. In terms of chemsex with bathhouse culture, that's why I was talking about informed consent earlier. There is a lot of crystal meth use in general right now. We're not going to stigmatize the queer community, but in the queer community, it is, I'm going to say, disproportionately represented because people are asking people, because they're othered and because of the assumed sexual practices and ideas around sex that the heteronormative community has of people who are queer and gay males especially, they think that there's a lot of sexual deviancy or promiscuity in the gay community. So the crystal meth question comes up a lot. But if you ask a bunch of other people, maybe in rural areas or in the suburbs, what answer are you gonna get? That's something that, you know, that's something that's not as often broached. Informed consent, informed consent, informed consent. Also, there's a lot of, with chemsex, it's the union or of different substances. So it's GHB, ketamine, and then sometimes MDMA, sometimes K, it depends. And the GHB can cause you to drop out, which is why informed consent is so important. And there's a lot of secrecy, and there's a lot of, sometimes there's violence in the bathhouse culture, in the bathhouse community. So that's why informed consent is so important. And also, if you're drinking and you're doing GHB, you can drop out easier. By drop out, I mean like nod off or like blackout. And it also has a synergistic effect. So drink water and also dose carefully. Because GHB is like potent. It's not as, you don't need a lot of it. And informed consent, like that, like it's so important. So freaking important. Yeah.
Brilliant. Kia, yeah, we're gonna throw to Dawn. Plug in, friend. Go ahead,
Hey.
Dawn.
I just wanted to say, and to remember to change your condoms often, because condoms weren't made for like long duration use. Like they were made for the real life expectancy moments. And just kidding. But so like change your condoms often. Use lots of lube, and that should also aid in chemsex and stuff like that. Because condoms will tear and they break, and you know.
There's also a lot of prevention technologies in the community. So the existence of PrEP and PEP, which is pre-exposure prophylaxis and post-exposure prophylaxis. And there's also a lot of serophobia that straight folks and other people who prescribe to heteronormative stigmas have around queer sex, gay sex, and gay men. And so that actually reduces your possibility of getting any type of HIV or AIDS, because they're two different things. And there's also like a level of stigma that people have for people who don't use PrEP and who do. So those are really important. And there are also special type of condoms if you want. So you might not have to change that often, depending on your condom.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a consumer world, right? I want to sort of leave the chemsex party and play conversation, because we're actually going to do a webinar on some basics on gender and sexuality, mostly gender, and then because we want to give up some basis, because we have a bunch of new harm reductionists in Canada, and then the next Stimulants Connect after that webinar will be on party and play, and so Kia, we should talk. So I'm going to close the poll in a second. But just because I just mentioned about the next Stimulus Connect, we actually have our next Stimulus Connect is on June 23rd, so just by solstice there. It's called, it's a draft title right now, but it's called Recognizing Expertise. And it's going to be present the findings from the Canadian Association of People Who Use Drugs, best practices in meaningful and respectful engagement of people who use drugs. So that was led by Natasha from Kaput, and actually myself from the Canadian Drug Policy Coalition. So the registration is up, so you can register now if you want. The next event is actually a webinar on June 10th, and that registration is actually not up yet. It also has a draft title. This one's like, it's a bit testy, so we want to get it right. But really, it's going to speak to the range of alternatives in the treatment world related that aren't abstinence. So we have lots of conversations across Canada about what recovery looks like, and often that is inferred as being abstinence-based only. And so we're actually going to have that conversation. So it's going to be a webinar. So that's exciting. So now I'm going to go to Andre's question. Sorry, Andre, for mispronouncing your name. If doctors were to prescribe these substances, I wonder what their approach to polydrug use would be, and ideally, how should they approach it? I would add that to say, we want your opinion on what doctors should be, how they should be approaching polydrug use for prescribing.
Yeah, I think they're kind of touching on it. Now some of the safer supply doctors, and they are prescribing, the opiates and the stimulants simultaneously. So I think that's already something that's being broached. But like I had mentioned, the prescribing for someone who may be more of like a chronic or excessive, whatever that means, stimulant user, I don't think it's equivalent as of yet, mainly prescribing like those dexedrins and stuff like that. So I think somebody had wrote in the chat about, stop giving the equivalents and give the real stuff. And, it's well documented, well written about, cocaine and its uses back before it became taboo. So yeah, I think there is some work that's being done around safer supply and polysubstance use, but definitely room for improvement. Yeah.
Thanks, Kim. Was there anything else anybody could hear?
I'm sorry, can I come back? Yeah, and
Okay.
totally talk more. Sorry.
It's okay. This is like the nature of Stimulus Connect. We're chill and we're good. And nobody has yet to even talk about the fact that there was 2 adorable puppies behind Rebecca this whole time, and we don't know their names.
Easily distracted, so I've been looking at them, but I just sometimes people think that I go way left field, so I just didn't even broach that. But I am really interested in their names. She can private message me after if she'd like.
Well, maybe we'll tweet it as well. It'll be great. Kim, go ahead, Dawn. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I think I recently had to go to the hospital for a missed shot, and I don't think that people who don't use drugs should be servicing people who do use drugs. Just because technically the way I see it is that there should be a whole ward dedicated to people who use drugs in the hospital, the emergency area. And that then people who use drugs should be the ones that receive them and then also triage them, and then also prescribe medications and actually listen to them. Because I've met so many people who have said that they've been open and frank and honest with their doctor about their use and what they believe they need in order to be properly prescribed and medicated. And then their doctors being oh, I'm more adulterated than you are, and I know better than you, and so I'm gonna give you what I give you. And apparently we're supposed to be grateful for that. And it's just so I think that when people are open and honest and frank, and then you slap them on the wrist, that you're actually turning away people who can be a benefit to changing the way healthcare looks today. Because let's face it, I mean, healthcare, you would think that people who work in healthcare would be the epitome of what healthcare is, of healthy relationships and with themselves, the people around them and their communities. But it is not like that in hospitals. It is not like that in those spaces.
Yeah, and I think we kind of spoke to it a bit, John, like when you were off, right? It's like, you know, how beautiful it would be if we didn't have to have that specific word, right? That doing drugs was just socially acceptable and there was no stigma or anything behind it. And I wanted to mention, like, I had a family doctor myself when all this crazy COVID starts, and, you know, I am clinically diagnosed with anxiety as well. And I was trying to get some Ativan, and my own family doctor was like, I can't do that. And I was like, why? And he's like, I can't. And I'm like, this is something you've regularly prescribed to me, but since I'm like asking for it in a state of panic, right, it wasn't accepted. So I said, well, what if I go out and I seek some sort of, you know, toxic drug that's going to kill me? And he said, well, that's your problem then. And, you know, that created, and this was my family doctor of like 5 years. And so that created a lot of barriers for myself as well, right? Like, and I do know a lot of the stigma and shame and stuff that followed after that. And especially with this whole crazy freaking pandemic thing, and we're already isolated, and then to have that sort of reception, like you were saying, Dawn, from a medical professional, it just shies us away from seeking any sort of you know, further medical care.
Oh, okay. So I'm going to just share the results from the poll. So I think it's what do we say? We have a schwack of you, 32 of you folks voted. So actually, some people have had to go on to their next meeting already, but there are the results. You should be able to see those, and you can just minimize them if you want to get them out of the way. We need to do a bit of wrap up. And so what I'd like to do is give a couple of minutes to each of you for any last words. But before we do that, Dawn, can I just ask, are you cool to still do the honor song at the end? Yeah? Okay. I think that was yes. I'm a little upside down, but yes. Okay, perfect. So Kim or Dawn, did you want to add a sort of a couple last minutes? I do have a question we can get to if we have time, but go ahead, Kim, if you want. Last words? No?
I don't have too much to say. I just wanted to, you know, really thank everyone who has been watching, like on the side, right? It was a very constructive, positive, amazing, really gives some empowerment, right? So for myself, this is kind of one of the first times, you know, we have these badass harm reductionists that are on here on the panel speaking to us, you know, who've done this work, who's really advocated. And for myself, you know, I was really isolated and really in a shameful spot working, you know, and, you know, joining people who surrounding myself with people who use drugs and people who understand it has been so monumental in my life. So yeah, that's just, I wanted to share, like, this is totally new to me and this has been so awesome. So thanks, Shay, for having me as well.
I just want to say that the more we talk about it and the more we normalize it, the better chances we have of changing the way things are today. And the way things are today is that we are losing people we love at an unprecedented rate, and they're also missing out on their gifts that they can contribute to community and their perspectives and how fucking shit. Oh, Rage in the Hall.
Did we lose Dawn? We didn't lose Dawn. She's still here. We lost her video. I feel like that's a totally even small experience of anger and frustration related to the amount of people we've lost. And I want to just honor everybody who's spoken today. I really appreciate the level of engagement the folks who've joined us has. It's super helpful when you ask questions and you engage and you have conversations. Twitter's been on fire. One of the things that the attendees of this Stimulus Connect do not know is that today we're having to show just how awesome we are. So this is what's happened to us in the last 24 hours. One of us broke our foot. One of us is so nauseous, they haven't been able to join us. We've had 2 people lose power, and really at the end of the day, we're all just figuring it out. And so I want to thank everybody who showed up and who's answered the poll and been here. Certainly Kim, Dawn, and Akia have rocked this. We want to let you know, it's funny because I'm reading Rebecca's notes, and it says Shay will be sending you. So let me just say, I will be sending you a link to do the post evaluation. As you know, we need these sort of things so that we can be better. And also we like to share the awesome with our funders. We've given you lots of stuff. So hopefully, if you're looking for anything, we can find it. You can always find us through social media. If you're wanting to get an introduction to either Kim, Dawn, or Akia, just email Stimulus. We can hook you up. We'll do that. We won't release anybody's information without their permission, of course. But we'll do that for sure. I want to shout out to Sophie and Nick, who've been doing simultaneous interpretation. So this is the first time we've had two folks, and we do community translation. So we love to engage folks who have and know about these topics to do our simultaneous interpreter, and go from there. Yes, Kim.
Even if you don't speak French, I just flipped it over just to see how cool it was. Super freaking cool. I know very little French and mostly swear words from my mom, so thank you. But yeah, if you switch it over just to check it out, that is really cool. Thank you so much for doing that.
Well, and I know that Nick's also, because they're sharing back and forth, they've been able to actually engage in the chat, which is probably a fun, great change for them as well. So thanks to Sophie and Nick for doing simultaneous interpretation. One of the things I would ask, if for the folks that are francophones, and I see from the poll that we have some people who are bilingual and some people who are unilingual in French. If you feel comfortable, you can private message me or the panelists, or just put it in the chat. Let us know how the translation's been going today. We often don't get to ask that specific question, so I'm just going to throw that in there. So I'm going to invite all the background folks back, and I just want to be cognizant. Oh, maybe I'm going to ask you my last super question before I invite all the planners back. Are you ready, Kim?
I feel really targeted right now, but yeah, of course, hit me.
Oh, good. You're like this last survivor of our speakers, because we've had texts. You're like, woo, Penella's rocking it today. What would you say is your top benefit, either for you or in your community, around stimulant use? What's the top benefit of stimulant use, of stimulants?
Happiness, right? And if stimulants for me equal happiness, and that's something, you know, whether it's organically, medically, physically, it's something that sometimes I lack. And so if I'm lacking those stimulants that stimulate my body, then I am just a misery pot. So yeah, happiness.
That's brilliant. That's great. And I'm sure you would agree that the stigma, bad science, ideology, racism that has led to some drugs being regulated and some drugs being unregulated is, of course, the major cause for so much harm in Canada and around the world. Any thoughts on what a time and a place would feel like if there wasn't criminalization of of people who use drugs and of drugs?
Yeah, I know for myself, like even in my personal, professional, whatever life, love, right? It's like just universal love, whether you use substances, you don't use substances, it's good, bad, whatever relationship, is just, we're just in a place of total love, no matter love, unconditional love and acceptance, right? That's how I rule my life. And I hope that we can spread that far and wide.
Brilliant. Welcome back, Dawn. Dawn, how do you feel about singing us out and speaking to the honor?
For sure. So my name is Dawn Levand. I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba. What is it? It's Anin Boujou, Nagamoan, Kinyu, Ikwe, Nadisnakas, Abinase Totem, Apache. So like I'm still learning about like who I am and where I come from, and but like that's like a traditional greeting. As I said, like hi, hello. My spirit name is Singing Eagle, and I'm from the Thunderbird clan. And then Apache means I love you all very much. So I love you all. And the song I wanted to sing is called The Traveling Song, and it's supposed to be for people both in this realm and also those in the spirit realm, that we arrive at our destination safely. One of my friends just recently passed, and it was sudden and unexpected, and I'm sang at his partner's funeral, but not at his, and so I'm glad to have this moment to sing for other people's loved ones who have passed. And then I hope that wherever you guys are, that wherever you got to go today, you arrive at your destination safely, and that you have all that you need. Way, hey, ya, hey, ya, hey, yo. Way, hey, ha, hey, ha, 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 hey, yo. I hope you guys have a day. Thanks so much for coming out and meeting with us, and thanks so much for Stimulus for being what it is. And yeah, man, all of our songs are prayers, and all of our prayers only Creator answers. So pray often.
Thank you for that. Amazing.
Thank you so
Amazing.
much.
Ikea, I know you've got some your videos going on and off, which I absolutely understand. What I'll do, if you're interested, I will hand to you in a second or in a couple minutes. I'm going to ask Kirsten, Rebecca, if she's still there, Savannah, Sophia, Nick, if they hear this, to just put your videos on for a second. Because I just want to take an opportunity to thank you all for doing all the work you did in your background. I want to, Savannah's been a rock star in managing the chat. Emily is, oh, I didn't ask Emily to bring her lovely face back, but I am wearing one of the AIDS Committee of Newfoundland, Emily's programs t-shirts today. And so it says harm reduction saves lives. Which I thought it made sense to wear swag today. I will see what I can do, Nick, about your video. And Ikea, how do you feel about giving us your last couple words? And it's okay if you don't want to.
Thank you for that, Dawn. Personally, I believe that even though they're not here like physically, they're still with us, and we have to make our peace with that. And like the song, like, I appreciate that acknowledgement of our grief. And I really respected that, so thanks.
Thank you. I'm in the unusual place of wanting to say deeply and thoughtfully thank you all. There were lots of great questions. There's the resources that are on the website. We're going to talk more, and I heard this very clearly through the chat, that we need to talk more about how wonderful drugs are and how great and helpful and really beneficial they are to people, to Canadians, to people who use drugs. And so I wanted to tell you that I absolutely heard that. So if anybody has any ideas on what the next few Stimulus Connect should be, we can work on those all the time. Thank you. I hope everybody has a good day, and please keep safe and keep 6 on your friends, family, and the people you work with. Thanks, everybody. And for the panelists and speakers, I'm going to stay here for a second. So you're welcome to chat amongst yourselves. I'm going to turn the recording off.